Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. We are mostly radical feminists here, and you could say we're the epitome of TERFs, the targeted opponent of gender ideology, identity ideology proponents. Our analysis of gender identity ideology has been consistent since Jan Raymond's The Transsexual Empire, which was written in 1979. So for 45 years, we were not surprised by this new attack on women. So because there have been many attacks on women and we're living in a horrific patriarchy, so we had already a clear analysis of the way that the patriarchy oppresses women. In 2018, we wrote a Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which lays out our position and is based on CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and our feminist perspective. It's been signed by 38,753 people from 160 countries and is supported by 541 organisations. We have volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent, and do join us and help our work, which is promoting the declaration and the position of the declaration. Now, today we have Dianne Post from the USA, and she's going to talk about the WDI submission to the International Criminal Court regarding principles of gender persecution. Then we're going to hear from Megan Blake from Australia, and she's also going to talk about the WDI submission to the International Criminal Court on guidelines on gender persecution. And then we're going to have Gunda Schumann, who is going to talk about information on the status of lesbians in international human rights law, which is related to the two previous talks as well, and will be a really useful addition to that. Then we're going to hear from Denise McKenna, who's from the UK, from the Woman Is This survey report, and she's going to tell us the main results of the survey and explain what the survey did and why it's important. And then we're going to hear from Yal Bano from Afghanistan. She's the WDI country contact for Afghanistan. She's going to tell us about the situation of women in Afghanistan. And then finally, we'll have a couple of news reports from USA and from Australia. So I'm really pleased now to introduce our first speaker, who is Dianne Post. And Dianne Post has been an attorney since 1980, working on the issues of violence and discrimination against women in the US and around the world, and is going to talk on WDI submission to the International Criminal Court regarding principles of gender persecution. So thank you so much, Dianne, and over to you.
Somehow I was blind copied on an email from the Madre Association or organization. It was an invitation to a May 15 seminar to learn about the new principles of gender persecution that the prosecutor from the International Criminal Court is developing. According to that particular email, civil society groups were asked to weigh in. Then the Madre group gave an example of their own letter and their resource guide that was totally focused on the rights of men who identify as women. They asked us all to sign on their letter, which of course I was not about to do. But it also said that groups could submit their own comments by November 22 of this year, just yesterday, to a certain email address. So I thought, well, what the heck, I can do that. So the irony did not escape me that Madre, which of course means mother, had as their global campaign officer a man who said he uses he, him pronouns. So I then did my research to find out what the principles were, what the prosecutor at the ICC was doing, and making sure that the time to submit and the place to submit were correct. What I found was that the policies already did exist, but now they want to update their gender persecution policy that has existed since 2022. So we're a few years late to the game, but better late than never. Using Article 7 of the Rome Treaty, they want to say nothing about sex and only talk about gender. Somehow they think, as lawyers, which amazes me, that sex discrimination principles are not enough to cover gender violence. So they just want to get rid of sex. So the 20-page submission that WDI submitted covers pretty much what you would expect and what you've heard before, which I'm not going to go into. We just talk about the overarching violence against women by men because they're women, the allegedly fundamental belief in the whole world in the equality in women's rights in society, and the failure to listen to women. I argued that removing sex violates international law, especially CEDAW. It violates the human rights of women and girls, silences women's voices, and reduces women to body parts. On a more legal basis, I argued that gender in these new policies is undefined and has an amorphous and ever-changing definition, so it is not suitable as a category of legal protection. Gender relies on the stereotypes in that society, what is expected of women in that society, so it is different all over the world. So there is no legal clarity, no international norm on what gender is. And how they define it is they use gender to define gender. Gender ideology is someone who thinks they're in gender ideology. Well, this, of course, takes us absolutely nowhere. Whereas sex is well defined and the same throughout the world. Sex as a class is sufficient to prosecute crimes based on what someone looks like or acts like or claims to be. It's simply, well, because you dress like this, we're going to beat you up. Well, that can be prosecuted on sex because normally one sex wears that outfit and this is a different one, so you can use sex discrimination. You don't need to have this other category and get rid of women. Women have to be protected as a category because of the history of violence and exclusion against us by men. Now, the principles of the ICC, the new ones, and the old ones, actually, they hint at the structural inequality that underlies the problem. They hint at it, but then they ignore it. So they know it's there, but they don't want to deal with it. Where gender is part of that structural inequality, as we know, that they are upholding by this move, not eliminating. They are supposing that gender roles, which are nothing but stereotypes, are in fact real. So then I lay out some legal problems with not having adequate definitions. For example, if this happened, you wouldn't be able to prosecute because of that. If that happened, you wouldn't have a case because of this. Evidence would be difficult to get, etc. So I also do mention briefly that the problem of gathering accurate data, if you don't have sex segregated data, you don't have accurate data regarding assaults, rapes, etc. So I, for one, have no illusion that this submission will change the minds of the committee. But what I hope is that there's at least one person on that committee who has some sense, and it will give that person something to argue with. They can argue more forcefully. They can say they are supporting the desires of these women all over the world, and you know how big we are and how many people signed the WDI statement. So it will, if there is someone on that committee who's got some sense, then it will help them to have an argument. And I also want the supporters of patriarchy to know that we are here. We are not going away. We have fought you for 5,000 years, and we will fight you until we win. Thank you.
We'll now go to Megan. Megan is from Australia. She has a degree in law and a PhD in hermeneutics and interpretation. She's worked in policy, research, and project management, and has taught at school and university. Megan's advocacy work has focused on women's rights and refugee support. She is currently working with the Feminist Legal Clinic and groups including Sex-Based Rights Australia, and is going to continue to tell us about the WDI submission to the International Criminal Court, policy guidelines on gender persecution. So thank you so much, Megan, and over to you.
So I'm going to follow on from Dianne and talk about the history of the idea of gender in those ICC instruments and how it actually was quite sensible, but has evolved into something problematic and that can be perverted by member states to replace sex or entrench sex stereotypes, which is, of course, the opposite of what the mandate is. So as Dianne said, the OTP, Office of the Prosecutor, is redeveloping the 2022 policy on gender-based crimes. That was itself a reassessment of the original 2014 policy. So the 2014 policy was called the Policy Paper on Sexual and Gender-Based Crimes, and the 2022 was renamed the Policy on the Crime of Gender Persecution. Since then, we've had a 2023 policy on gender-based crimes partly revised. And so the current policy under development is intended to harmonise with that 2023 update rather than entirely supplant it. So this idea of gender persecution is based on the Rome Statute, which came into force in 2002. The statute established 4 key international crimes, including crimes against humanity. It established the International Criminal Court, and it was the first international instrument to expressly recognise the gender and sex-based element of crimes against humanity and war crimes. So it defines gender like this. It says, for the purpose of this statute, gender is understood to refer to the 2 sexes, male and female, but within the context of society. So the statute doesn't list sex as a separate ground protected from persecution, however, which means that only the persecution based on the social gender norm context of society is technically covered. Now, this was actually improved with the 2014 policy. This was adopted by the Office of the Prosecutor to guide its work enforcing the statute. Now, the treatment of sex and gender under the 2014 policy, which is now superseded by the 2022 revision, was based on the WHO's legal tools info sheet on gender, women, and health. What do we mean by sex and gender? Now, this info sheet is written in language that can easily be understood by a wide range of people, and it logically differentiates between the relevant categories of sex and gender in a way that I think is comprehensive and fair. So the info sheet says that sex refers to biological and physiological characteristics that define men and women, but it says that gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviours, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women, and says that male and female are therefore sex categories, while masculine and feminine are gender categories. So it gives some examples of sex characteristics. So it says women menstruate while men do not, men have testicles while women do not, women have developed breasts that are usually capable of lactating while men have not, and it even says men generally have more massive bones than women. It also gives some very sensible examples of gender characteristics. It says in the United States and most other countries, women earn significantly less money than men for similar work. In Vietnam, many more men than women smoke, as female smoking has not traditionally been considered appropriate. In most of the world, women do more housework than men. So this accords with other UN statements, such as from the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the CEDAW Committee, which in General Recommendation number 28 in 2010 says sex refers to biological differences between men and women. Gender refers to socially constructed identities, attributes, and roles for women and men in society's social and cultural meaning for these biological differences, resulting in hierarchical relationships between women and men. So it talks about the impact on the distribution of power and rights favouring men and disadvantaging women as a result of gender. So this 2014 policy is called the Policy on Gender-Based Crimes, but the use of gender in it is not really that bad because it's not used in a way that tries to slide into or erase the category of sex. The definition of gender-based crimes in the policy is inclusive of sex. It says that gender-based crimes are those committed because of a person's sex and or socially constructed gender roles. The problem is that in 2022, they removed this reference to sex and began to speak only of gender. And they also began to conflate categories. So 2022 is when the initialism LGBTQI+ began to be used, especially in sentences like women, girls, men, boys, and LGBTQI+ persons, which of course is suggesting that LGBTQI+ is one coherent group with common characteristics and interests. It's also suggesting that people such as lesbians or gay men within that group are somehow different from women, men, girls, and boys. Secondly, from 2022, characteristics that are not really gender norms begin to be included in the category of social constructs and gender norms. For example, the 2023 policy lists sexual orientation and even the words woman and man in its examples of gender constructs, social constructs. It even lists gender identity, which of course is not meant to be a social construct. Thirdly, the definition of gender-based crimes is also narrowed in the 2022 policy to exclude the ground of sex that was, of course, in the 2014 one. So the new definition simply says that gender persecution is the crime against humanity of persecution on the grounds of gender. And lastly, the 2022 policy also limits this even further to saying that persecution is always punishment for gender non-conformity. It completely ignores the aspect of gender persecution that is actually the enforcement of oppressive gender norms against even gender-conforming women. China, India, Pakistan, and other countries have not practiced female infanticide as a punishment because girl babies were too masculine. Women are not raped in war as a punishment for being insufficiently feminine. It's ridiculous. So the 2023 policy goes even further than simply removing sex in favour of gender and begins to rely on the concept of gender identity as a replacement for both sex and gender. For instance, one footnote kind of slipped in the bottom of the page says, inspired by the gender persecution policy, this policy notes that the quote, men and women includes some LGBTQI+ individuals, while other non-binary LGBTQI+ persons may not identify as either. Now, that footnote conflates categories to produce a meaningless statement that flies in the face of accepted ICC policy definitions that it itself references by asserting that the phrase men and women is actually no longer a reference to sex. Instead, it claims that only some people in the LGBTQI+ group are male or female. And of course, the implication is that the male and female sexes, rather than being material biological qualities, are in fact things that, humans can opt into or out of depending on the way they wish to identify at any given time. So it's statements like these that are now permitting member states to obviate the sex-based rights of women and girls with impunity. So, for example, in the recent Australian case of Tickle and Giggle, the Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner intervened to submit to the federal court that the word sex is not a biological concept, referring to whether a person at birth had male or female physical traits, nor is it a binary concept limited to the male or female sex, and that it is broad enough to encompass the idea that a person's sex can be changed. So the Commissioner refuted the distinction pled by Giggle between sex and gender. Giggle essentially pled a version of the distinction under international law, the Rome Statute, the 2014 ICC policy. This version of international law pled by Giggle was rejected by the Australian Human Rights Commission and the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and sex was said to be determined by a person's expressed gender or claimed gender identity. And the federal court affirmed the Commissioner's interpretation. The judgment outlined the meaning of sex under the law, saying yes, it was not a biological concept, It was not a binary concept. And they said that now the word sex took a broader ordinary meaning informed by its use in, for example, international law. So the term gender was chosen for the Rome Statute for the very purpose of ambiguity and openness. So the fact now that the elasticity is being exploited is not an accident. It's now the term being favoured by member states in favour of the more concrete term sex because of that. So, for example, during the International Law Commission's April 2024 session on the draft articles on prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity, the Quorum actually agreed to leave out the Rome Statute's definition of the word gender. The stated reason for leaving the term undefined in the new draft articles on crimes against humanity was to allow the term to be applied based on an evolving understanding as to its meaning. Portugal, for instance, noted that they welcomed the removal of the definition of gender because they said it allows great flexibility compared to previously adopted solutions. And Australia, of course, thoroughly approved it, saying that it enables states to apply the definitions that are used within their national systems. Now, I mean, the national system of Australia uses a very different definition of gender from the Rome Statute and has instead chosen to define it as the determinant of legal sex, untethered completely from biological sex. So this has allowed Australia, for instance, to effectively eliminate the consideration of sex-based rights when defined biologically as distinct from gender norms or self-declared identities. So it's for these reasons that we're pushing back against the trend, which I would call a devolution, seen from the original 2014 document to the current policy, and urge the prosecutor to reverse that trend, which, since it was pretty well stated in their original policy, I think is a reasonable goal. Thanks very much.
We're going to now go to our next speaker, fantastic, who is Gunda. So Gunda Schumann is a lawyer, sociologist, author, board member of Lesbian Action Centre, LAS, Reloaded EV. And she is going to tell us about information on the status of lesbians in international human rights law. So thank you so much, Gunda, and thank you for the work on this document as well. So, and over to you.
First, a couple of words to the background of non-discrimination clauses in international human rights law. It has all begun with, quote unquote, other status in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Article 2 reads, "Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status." Other status means that the list on prohibited grounds of discrimination is not exhaustive and other grounds may be incorporated in this category. So far, so harmless. However, this loophole was used by NGOs with consultative status at the UN. As early as in June 2006, even before the publication of the so-called non-binding Yogyakarta Principles, they demanded the inclusion of sexual orientation and gender identity as protected categories in international human rights law before the newly founded UN Human Rights Council. Has this strategy been successful? And how far are lesbians affected by these categories? Now we should go into the details. In the following, the protected categories of sexual orientation and gender identity started to make it in commentaries, comments, and guidelines of committees in charge of the UN covenants, for example, the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, General Comment number 20, as early as 2nd of July 2009. But that was not sufficient two trans activists. They aimed to establish a new UN body in charge of gender identity, thereby piggybacking on sexual orientation that had been mentioned in general comments number 14 of 2000 and 15 of 2003 on health and nutrition issues of the previously mentioned committee in the context of HIV/AIDS. The focus was on gay men. On 30th of June 2016, the UN Human Rights Council, established on the 15th of March 2006, passed a resolution creating the mandate of independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination, abbreviated CEDAW, based on sexual orientation and gender identity. That was HRC Resolution 32-2. Quotation, the mandate was created on the basis of Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, its equality and non-discrimination provision, ensuring that nobody is discriminated against on the basis of the listed grounds and also other status, making this an open list where gender identity and sexual orientation can be read into the article. In fact, the HRC resolution established the mandate of CEDAW has no specific legal basis in one of the United Nations treaties, nor a direct reference to a recognized protected category. The political rather than legal character of this mandate is reflected in the voting pattern of the 47 member states of the Human Rights Council. 23 in favor, 18 against, 6 abstentions. In the following, the CEDAW expert developed a narrative embedding gender identity in human rights law as if it were an inevitable and natural part of the fabric of human rights. And sexual orientation and gender identity were going to be conflated in the report of CEDAW titled The Law of Inclusion 2021. Interim conclusion, sexual orientation as protected category is historically focusing on gay men, while both categories, sexual orientation and gender identity, have been conflated by the CEDAW expert, thus merely focusing on gender identity. Now I come to the group. How does WDI UN Lobby Group come into play? As we have heard, the WDI UN Lobby Group has drafted a submission requesting the ICC to reinstall sex as a protected category for women as a sex class. According to the ICC policy, the status of lesbian women is protected from discrimination by the social construct of sexual orientation, which is lumped together with the category of gender identity. However, a critique of this categorization was not considered relevant for the purpose of the submission. Furthermore, this questionable protection did not raise any fundamental concerns. Following this logic, lesbians would not be protected by the category female gender, in brackets sex, within the context of society, but as a social construct together with gender identity. After my protests and further discussions, 2 paragraphs have been changed accordingly, number 38. By conflating sex and gender, women, including lesbians, are left open to forced association with men and are thus vulnerable to violence. If you do not include sex at its own discrete category, women, including lesbians and girls, are insufficiently protected because the biological basis of their oppression is left to individual state parties to either include or not include in gender as they see fit. If, for instance, a lesbian is classified by a state party as a different gender from a heterosexual woman because that state party determines sexual orientation to be a key aspect of gender, different protections may apply to women based on their sexual orientation, and indeed, some women may not be classed as a gender of woman due to that sexual orientation. However, sexual orientation is based on sex, not on identity. Classification of lesbians by any state party as a different gender from heterosexual women would be unacceptable and would divide the sex class of women. Paragraph 52. It refers to Article 2 in the ICC policy, refers to social constructs and criteria used to define gender, and that these include constructs about sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Now our paper. The material class of physical biological sex is not determined by an individual sense of self, performance choices in terms of feminine or masculine clothing or behaviors, or sexual orientation. A lesbian woman engaged in same-sex sexual activity, or a woman who chooses not to perform femininity, for instance, is no less a member of the sex class of women than a woman who does perform femininity. Thanks.
Move on now to our next speaker, who is Denise McKenna. Now, Denise McKenna is a lesbian, radical feminist, active in feminism in the 70s and 80s. She's used psychiatric services and has been a mental health activist for 30 years, challenging the medical model of mental distress. She studied art history with an interest in art and psychoanalysis. And Denise is going to present the Woman Is This survey report. So thank you so much, Denise, and over to you.
So which woman stands for Woman Is This? It was set up in 2021 by a collective of women who, like all of us here, have experienced some level of distress by gender ideology and the abuse we've been subject to for objecting to it. So we designed a survey to gather information on the mental health and well-being impact on women who don't accept this ideology. And I would just say that I do recognise that much of what is happening will need to be dealt with at the level of changes to laws or clarification of existing laws. But I'm not a legal person. But what I understand of mental distress, and I have extensive knowledge, first-hand experience, and also having studied psychology and various other things, I had that to offer to the fight. So that's what I offered. And as it is, lots of women thanked us for asking about how gender ideology was affecting them emotionally and psychologically. So the survey was open for responses between September and December 21, and I published the results in April this year. Now, I'd hoped to produce the results earlier, but for two reasons, I was unable to do so. The first was that we were taken aback by the huge volume of qualitative data, which is the comments women made, and that was very time-consuming to analyse. And the second was that members of the collective were working full-time, in addition to working on the survey, and some even had carer responsibilities on top of that. And others were dealing with their own health problems. For my part, I had a family member, my mother, who was seriously ill, and I was caring full-time for her. So this is the problem with unpaid grassroots activism. You have to fit it around other sorts of commitments. Anyway, it's well nigh impossible, as we know, for academics to research gender ideology from any perspective other than one that supports it, and no other funded organisation has dared to touch it from a critical perspective. Yeah, so no one's been carrying out any research into the impact on women, so it's been left to us grassroots activists to do that. We had no funding and we weren't experienced researchers, but we did have a thorough understanding of this ideology. So the survey was very ambitious. It possibly was too ambitious because so little had been covered already by any other researchers. There was just everything that needed to be covered. So it was a very long survey. And the group of women came together from a number of sources, mainly groups that called themselves gender critical or socialist feminists and some radical feminists. As Joe said, I have a history of mental health activism, and I wanted to look at the psychological impact on women. And I've been advocating for a social model of mental distress for the past 30 years. So the social model argues that what's referred to as mental illness is not an individual pathology, but rather as a response to societal problems rather than anything that is likely to place the problem within the individual and decontextualizes the distress. And I was also aware that there was no marker for psychiatric, no physical marker for psychiatric diagnosis. They're not based on hard science in the same way as physical illnesses are. In this respect, psychiatry is widely misunderstood as being a science, where in fact it's more like an art. So throughout the study, members of the collective left for various reasons and others joined. So there was a certain amount of coming and going from members of the collective. And I think this resulted in there being some slippage in the original focus of the survey, which was mental health. But as it is, the data that we obtained was so vast and introduced so many subjects, including mental health, but loads of other things like, the real world effects of this ideology on women, such as women being sacked for not acquiescing and such, that there was room for all sorts of different reports to be produced. And there are going to be other reports produced from other members of the collective. So turning to the report that has been produced, I was becoming concerned about the delay in publishing a report. So I decided to publish the results along with my commentary. And I included a huge amount of the comments made by the respondents, and there were literally thousands, about 10,000. So my reason for including so many comments verbatim was not for expediency, because it just took an incredible amount of time to go through them all and select what to include and what not to include. I included the majority of the comments, and I kind of see them rather like the consciousness raising practices of women, 30, 40, 50 years ago. That this is women talking about what they've experienced, and it was amazing the extent to which women's experiences were the same as each other's across the globe. I would also say that they were very powerful, a lot of these comments, and I didn't feel happy to reduce them to a statistic. So I published them as they were. So besides telling stories about the impact on their lives, women gave political critiques of gender ideology. And the comments, the whole lot, gives a fantastic overview of women's thinking and feeling about gender ideology and the realities of their lives as they try to navigate it and also as they try to resist it. So as I say, I see it in the same light as the consciousness-raising activities of women in the past. So here's some of the findings. Just under 3,000 women responded. In fact, there were many more, but they didn't all they didn't all inform us that they were female, so we couldn't include all of them, but just under 3,000 conformed to the requirements of the survey. 56% were from the UK, 16% were from America, just under 5% were from Canada, and the remainder were from countries across the world. And the survey was only available in English, and it was only available online. There's a copy of the actual survey included in the report, which is also only available online at the moment. So given that we couldn't advertise publicly to avoid risking it being sabotaged by anti-women activists, anti-feminist activists, we could only advertise it by word of mouth and on a few social media groups. So that, really 3,000 or just under was a fantastic response. The website is witsurveyreport.org, and it opens up into a landing page, which is this page here. And I'll just quote from that. It says, governments have not carried out any impact assessments, despite allowing an ideology of such enormity to permeate all of our societies. So it was in this context that we carried out something akin to an impact assessment. And you can see across the top, there's an about section. So if I open that up, it's very simple. And here there's a smaller context box. So the about here, it tells you about, just tells you basically what I've told you about the survey, the birth of the survey, its purpose, background to the issues, and scope of the report. It gives, so as I say, it gives a brief account of how it was formed. And it wasn't produced by any academic body or official research organisation. And we were therefore able to declare our own position on gender ideology, which is we recognise that the reality of sex is being replaced with the concept of gender identity. And we state that we are opposed to this. So we're very transparent about our own rejection of gender ideology. And I'll just read a little bit from the about. It says, we seek to consider whether the replacement of sex with gender identity as the marker for what constitutes a woman is in conflict with women's progress in the world, women's understanding of self and the nature of being a woman. Of particular interest to us is the psychological, emotional, and mental health impact on women. And it also outlines the background of the issues and states what the report will cover. And the about section also suggests how the report can be read. So the report is pretty massive. And I am going to produce a much smaller report that will also be available in hard copy for more public presentations. So I'll just quote, reading the comments in full will afford the reader an understanding of how gender identity ideology impacts on women's lives. Some comments also give an insight into the theoretical and political objections women have to this ideology. They reveal what is really happening to women in the name of inclusion, of people who claim to be the opposite sex from that which they are. And it's suggested that women don't, very few people are going to read the whole report, but it's divided into sections. So, and you can find that in the table of contents. So there's a table of contents, and each section. So you can read the section that's of interest to you. If you have a particular interest in racism or lesbian erasure, you can go straight into that. You don't have to read the whole thing. And the about section suggests how it can be read. So after we obtained all of the data, a new member joined the collective to help with the analysis, and she was a data analysis expertise. And we worked on a thematic analysis on the qualitative data. My feeling was that we weren't paying enough attention to the mental health impact of the ideology, which was the basis of the survey, and that the themes that we identified I felt didn't do enough justice to the mental health issues expressed. Although, to be fair, with a lot of coming and going with members of the collective, the data obtained, as I said earlier, it covered so many other issues. And I think it's probably inevitable that there was some slippage from the original focus. And there was room for women who hadn't been there when we set the thing out, to perhaps pick up on what was of interest to them. And as I say, my interest was very much on the mental health aspect. So So the glossary of terms includes, for me, something I wrote, which was what amounts to an essay on mental health. And I'm very critical of psychiatry because that individualizes mental distress. And I felt that that's particularly important as far as I can see, the psychiatric profession, which doesn't even acknowledge the existence of patriarchy and the abuses that women experience through patriarchy, it doesn't recognize the existence of that at all. And it's provided what could be described as an alibi for the promotion of gender ideology by providing what is really a highly contested diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And I just want to mention one comment that I found, or couple of sentences from Janice Raymond's book, Doublethink. And I think this sums up the medical model and the social model, the difference between. So she writes, amputating a healthy penis or breasts, being dependent on cross-sex hormones, and often embarking on secondary surgical journeys to alter voice or appearance is a walking tribute to the power of patriarchal definitions of masculinity and femininity, which teach all of us that in a gender-defined culture, it's easier to change your body than to change your society. So I think that statement illustrates how by individualizing distress, society is absolved of any responsibility for the problems experienced by the individual, and therefore absolved of any or excused from any obligation to change. And this is the important thing. This is how the whole idea of mental illness and psychiatry depoliticizes what are fundamentally socially issues that are a result of societal harms or societal problems. Now, there was a split in the collective. Others in the collective are producing reports on specific topics covered in the survey. And I know that these are going to be fantastic. They'll certainly contain more thorough statistical analysis than I was able to provide. And although we did split and disagreed, we're still on very friendly terms, and we'll still work together on some things. But I was very keen to get something out. And I do intend revisiting the mental health issues to produce a second very brief report. But this is a complete overview of all of the results. So it was aimed, the target group was female, and there were women who accepted sex both as immutable and the correct criterion to be used to categorize women and men, girls and boys. So the target group rejected gender ideology. And then if we go into the demographics, a little bit slow. So the demographics, the ages range from 18 to, well, I've got over 65 here, but in reality, there were women in their late 80s who filled in. And the largest grouping were women between 45 and 54. Under sexual orientation, 6.2% were heterosexual, 18.2% were lesbians, 16.6% were bisexual, and 2.6% said other. In terms of ethnicity, slightly over half described themselves as white. Others described themselves as Black, Asian, Jewish, Chinese, dual heritage, multi-ethnic, or mixed. And 1,017 women reported living with a disability. 452 specified as an existing mental health problem. And this means over a third of respondents have a disability or a health condition that makes them additionally vulnerable when having to deal with men in women's spaces. Now, I know disabled people don't like the use of the word vulnerable, but when you're disabled and out of control of your environment, you really are vulnerable. And many women have invisible disabilities. I was surprised by the number of women who said they had partial or complete hearing loss. So I'll just check the time. So, and women gave explanations for the mental health difficulties. So they used diagnostic terminology, but they then went on to explain that they had been raped by trans women, they had suffered incest, They'd been raped throughout marriage, sexual assaults as a child, having a husband who was AGP, having body dysmorphic disorder because they believed they were ugly, because they didn't conform to beauty standards, current beauty standards, domestic abuse and experiences in the sex trade, extreme abuse by a trans-identified male, a history of anxiety and depression that was not taken into account when she transitioned, mental health problems as a result of being rejected by her daughter over gender ideology. And this is a very sad one, complex post-traumatic stress disorder from multiple violent sexual assaults. And she writes, I've lost an eye due to male violence. I'm part-sighted. So these are the women who are being forced to share, bathrooms and things with men. And then if you go on to general questions, we did ask a direct question of whether it had affected women's mental health. And then what we've, so 95.8% of women reported that it had affected their mental health, with 31% saying that it had affected it a great deal. And what I've done is, so I put each table in, and then I put a sample of responses after each table. But then right at the end, after each question, and this the general questions also asked questions about language, the use of language. Then at the end of each section, there's women's comments, and then there's all of the women's comments. I've removed some for various reasons, and I explain why in the survey. So that's how it's laid out, and it's the same for all of the different topics covered. And I just want to read out a couple of other things. So 70% of women have been threatened for being critical of gender ideology. They were threatened either in person, online, or both. And by the way, a lot of women were not happy with us using the term gender critical. A lot of them called themselves radical feminists, and I have to say I also call myself a radical feminist. So a couple of sample comments on racism. I'm a Black lesbian, and I've never had racist abuse like I have because of the trans issue. Another, equating trans inclusiveness to inclusion of Black women in women's spaces is one of the most racist acts I've witnessed in this debate. It underlines the fact that these people do not consider Black women enough, and they see womanhood as a performance of white femininity rather than a state of existence. In terms of work and professional spaces, 69% of women said this ideology had affected their working lives, and 72.4% were concerned about the possibility of being sacked, and quite a number of women said they had already been sacked. Now, sex role stereotypes is interesting, and they were mentioned a lot. Obviously, we all know that this is about replacing biological sex, the concept of one's body, and as this woman puts it, this biological state of existence, replacing it with a conformity to sex role stereotypes. So we didn't have a separate section in the survey on this, but so much of it came up that I felt the need to, well, we did, not just I, the whole collective does. We decided to, analyze it as a separate section. But I want to read one of the comments that regarding sex role stereotypes, and I think it's a very interesting one. She writes, my niece is currently in her first year of high school at a small school. There are 6 female to male children in her friends, 2 in her immediate friend group. She's always marched to the beat of her own drum in regards to what she likes and what she wears, but recently has become obsessed with making sure she dresses girly enough so as not to invalidate these friends who apparently see her non-conformity as an insult to their identity. And then the final question asked a general question about the impact, or some general questions about the impact. And the top 5 issues that emerged where women were feeling degraded and dehumanized by the lack of concern for women. They were feeling excluded from women's spaces and services. They were self-excluding from groups and services. They were suffering from social isolation, shunned by families, friends, and society, and they were being silenced by others, or they were self-censoring their own views. And I used as a guide to measure the mental health impact on women by gender ideology the UK Charity Minds definition of good. UK Charity's Minds. Sorry, I'll say that again. The UK Charity Minds definition of good mental health. Or at least good well-being, and the World Health Organization's definition of good mental health and what is needed to maintain good mental health. So I refer to the World Health Organization's definition. And the conclusion states that the survey provides more than ample evidence that women's ability to flourish in the world is being thwarted in virtually every area of life by gender ideology. Some women describe their lives as having been destroyed and being prevented from speaking about it. And it also says that the survey reveals that women who are resisting this recategorization of women are being subject to widespread persecution. So that's us TERFs. And one woman described having the same reaction to the LGBTQI+ flag being displayed in places of work as she had in the past to the once ubiquitous porn calendars and pin-ups hanging on workplace walls. So that, you know, and obviously it's a vast report and there's a huge amount in it. The World Health Organization describes good mental health as being a human right, but this human right is only one of the many rights being denied women in the name of gender ideology. A number of women said that their lives and their mental well-being have been completely destroyed. This women's rights, I think about it almost all the time, as I've been a feminist from my earliest memory, and it's fundamental to my beliefs, values, and existence. So, and in terms of the summary and conclusion, that I'm going to do an awful lot more work on, and I'm going to produce a hard copy, hopefully to use it for more public presentations. I spoke to, just check the time, nearly finished. I spoke to a woman member of Parliament, member of the UK Parliament recently, and she said she would obtain a room for me to carry out a fuller presentation, which I'll probably do in the spring in the House of Commons. I have included recommendations, one of which, of course, is to sign the WEDI declaration. And of course, when I say recommendations, I have no illusion or no delusion that these are going to be these are going to be these are just aims. I think what we should be aiming for. And with my mental health activist hat on, it's really high time that actually I don't know that we need the psychiatric profession to the extent that we do, but we certainly need to be thinking of the impact of patriarchy, of the abuse of women, of domestic abuse on women when we are trying to understand women's experience of mental distress. Because believe me, psychiatric hospitals, certainly here in the UK, are filled with women who've been raped, abused, brutalized by men. And now, by the way, we've got men going into the women's wards in the psychiatric hospitals. So that's it. I'll just say that it was really moving to read all of these comments. There were just so many. It's about 10,000, maybe more. And it was really moving. And a couple of them I cried at. So, okay, that's, and we, by the way, women mustn't be ashamed of our emotions. We are led to believe that it's a weakness in women that we have emotions. No, it's a weakness in men that they are suppressing their emotions. We are humans and humans have emotions. So thank you.
We're going to now hear, because Yael can't show her face for very understandable reasons, about the situation because of the situation in Afghanistan. But Yael Bano is the WDI country contact for Afghanistan, and is going to talk to us about the situation of women in Afghanistan. And thank you so much for being the WDI country contact, and also for taking time to share what's happening, give us an update. Okay, so over to you, Yao.
Today I'm here to have an update report about Afghanistan women, which that is the graveyard of dream for Afghan women. And before starting to present the report, I would like to say a little about myself. This is Yal. I am an engineer and woman activist from Afghanistan country, which in Afghanistan to be woman is crime. So before Taliban took over, when I had the opportunity, despite of all problem, because I was, even before Taliban took over, women had not the all right. So despite of all problems, I had the opportunity. I went to school, I went to university, I had job, I had freedom, and I just used the opportunity, and life was nice for me despite of all problems, because I was woman. But then when the Taliban took control of Afghanistan on August 2021, life changed for me, and I was very sad. I had very depression, and I cried a lot, and that was not easy at all. So when I had hard time, then I thought with myself, okay, you know, the more percentage of Afghans, especially women, are not educated, because the culture, the situation, this because that time was not Taliban, but family, the father, the brother, they don't permit their daughters to go to school. So more women are not educated, and situation is hard. You are just here to think about yourself. You say, I'm sad, I lost my hope, I lost my achievement. This is not solution. So that was why I just said to myself, don't cry anymore, just be strong and be with women that they need you, be with Afghan women in this hard time. That is why I just the source that I had at that time, because I was inside Afghanistan that time, I had no right to go outside because of Taliban restriction. I had only my computer and I had internet. This was the only two sources. So I started to find women organization, and based on situation, everything was very complicated and no trust at all. So I searched and researched for more than 2 months. I just was doing the research to see, and why I did the research. There was two goals, two reasons. The first reason was to find a way, a path to say to the world, to the woman in the world, to the people in the world, what is really going on us, what is our situation, what is our pain. And second reason, to be with women, to the woman in Afghanistan don't say that we are alone, we don't have anyone. So that was why I just continued my research, and finally after a month, 2 months, I just finally I found contact with WDI, and today we have WDI Afghanistan. And I'm really proud and I really appreciate it. And I see WDI like a path, like a way between Afghan women and world women, and we can share the wise, the pain, and the situation of Afghanistan women. What is really going on with WDI path to the world, just to know what is life for us and how we all going, how is our life going on in Afghanistan, which I really appreciated. So just if you all think for just for some second, for 5 seconds, you all think, okay, one day before Taliban took over in Afghanistan, all women had access to education. If that was a school, if that was offline, that was online, that was university, all kind of education. Women had access to go to work. A woman had access to go outside, go to park, go to gym. They had the right to talk with each other in outside. They were in media, they were in parliament, they were part of society. We had ministry, especially for women, that they heard about women problems, solve the problems of women. We had a special place to listen about the problem. They had like a mental problem, family problem. That all looks very nice. Just in one day after Taliban took over, the all end. This is not looks real. We just say this is just in a story, this is just in maybe in the movie, but no, this is real. This happened real in Afghanistan. One day before Taliban, we had all rights, despite of problems, despite of the culture that was in Afghanistan on women. We just had right. But one day when the government changed and Taliban took over the control, all end, and we were all started to lose the hope. We just lost the hope. So this was the situation for us. But as I explained to you, we had the opportunity during 20 years. We all learned like women have right to education, women have right to work, women have right to freedom. So we all know. So when Taliban took control of Afghanistan, we just saw change in our life. So we said we cannot accept this situation. That was why brave women, they starting to protest on the street, and they just had one message and one question and one want, and that was to ask about their own right, if that was education or freedom of movement or work. This was all. That was the only reason that women come to street and the public and raise their voice and ask from Taliban, where's our right? We know that we have this right, but now we don't have this, and we want this right from us. Taliban had no answer for women in the street, and they had no logical answer for women. They just starting beating, arresting, killing of the women, the brave women that they had protest against them. The situation looks very dangerous. Taliban started to search every single home to see who is protesting against them, who is sharing their voice for the world, who is working and talking about them, because they are Taliban are talking and fighting just for power. But we, as a woman in Afghanistan, we just fight to have our own right, not more things. We want to have our freedom. We want to have the right of education. We want to have the right to work, and we want to respect us as a human. We want this, not all. Despite of this all dangerous situation, women not become silent or not get afraid. They just don't want to do a stop their protest against Taliban. Then when a situation get very horrible in public for women to protest in public against Taliban, then women started to protest inside their home. And they use different sources, social media, this or a different path, or they sang, or they just, the only goal was to just share their voices around the world, to know what is going on us. And we just see this is in 3 years, more than 3 years, still no work, no education, no park, no right at all. Well, that is sad. Well, that is really sad and a situation dangerous for women. Now I would like to talk what is now situation for women in Afghanistan. Currently, situation in Afghanistan for women is beyond this explanation. That is extremely horrible and hard. Women inside Afghanistan is completely alone. No one hears from them. in Afghanistan, there's no special organization, a special place to listen what is problem for Afghan women. They are completely alone. But again, I would like to say thank you to WDI, to WDI teams, and all women around the world with which you all are with us. I really appreciate it. If women are alone inside Afghanistan, but we don't feel that we are alone now, because women from around the world are with us, we feel very strong and powerful with that. And every day we receive a lot of message, a lot of powerful message from around the world, which that keep make us strong. And that is like very powerful feeling for us, and that tell us keep going, you all are not alone. One day these dark days will be end, and again you will have the right of right of education, work, or freedom of movement. Now I would like to talk what Afghanistan women want. The Afghanistan women want just their own right. They want to be again part of governments. They want to be again part of society. They want to be again work as an engineer, as a teacher. They want to be participate in different aspects of society. Now women are completely erased from the society, and no one have the right to complain based on situation that is inside Afghanistan. But we as a woman, we want our right. That is our right, and we will continue our fight, and we don't get fear. We just continue our fight, and we hope if we don't get our right in our times, maybe next generation after that, they will come and they have their right, which we just continue our fight, and we don't get fear. We will stop that time if we see we have again our right, and we see that Taliban are accepting and respecting to our right, and we will stop that time. But stop is not for us. We just continue to fight and to ask and to finally to see our goal, which that is to have our right. So as I explained, this is also not easy if we ask about our own right inside Afghanistan, because as I explained, that is extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous, not for the women that they ask, even for their relatives, for their brothers, for their fathers. I want to say you that more males, the men are also with women. They are with women, but they don't have anything to fight with Taliban to destroy them. Because if I say like during the first time when Taliban came to Afghanistan and took the control of Afghanistan during 1996 to 2001, that time Taliban had come and took control of Afghanistan, and they had the all control and the all cruel on women, and women had no right. And then they new other government come. But now when Taliban come to Afghanistan, they have like the all government that was result of 20 years. They have now more sources from the government. They have everything. They can do everything. If like a main brother or father of a family, they allow their sound that we are with our daughters, with our sister. We want the right for our daughters, for our sister. The Taliban just kill a person. That's easy for them. And I know very story. I have very story that woman said to me that Taliban killed that person, and they said, if you share this story with media or others, we will kill another members of your family, all your relatives. And that is why the men cannot share very clear to the media with their face to say we want our right for our daughters. That is because that is so much dangerous, and on other side, this is very easy for Taliban to kill and destroy the people that they work against them. For example, like in our group, when I had the idea to how to fight for our right, how to ask about our right, when I shared my idea with my friends, that was both men and women, they all became very angry. And I really appreciate one of my friend. I cannot share the complete name. I just said the first name. His name is Mirais. He stand up from the first till now, and he is doing great, and he support our right. And he is fighting with different ways to to be with us, to support us, but he cannot share his face. He cannot even share his real name, or he's just working in hide. And we cannot say to anyone that he is part of us, because the life for him is so dangerous. And if Taliban know, just Taliban will kill him. And that is, we don't want this. We don't want to lose someone which they support us. That is the all dangerous situation. When I was in Afghanistan, I also received a lot of warning, threats, and everything. That was why I finally decided to flee from my countries, and I fled at 2 a.m. 2 a.m. from my country. So I came to new country. Now I live in new country. Life is not easy in new country. Everything is different from your culture, from people, from language, and everything. I have a lot of problems and try to be okay with that. But in here, even I'm in here, I'm not silent. I'm not silent. I still continue more and more and more than Afghanistan, because if I stop to help to raise my voice for Afghan women, I just blame myself. And I will say, okay, you just fled from Afghanistan, and you, a woman, are now alone inside Afghanistan. That is why I am doing more and more and more for women, just to women don't feel that you're alone. That is why we have like a program that is Beautiful Afghanistan program. In Beautiful Afghanistan program, we help Afghan students with their studies. We have teachers, we have students. I cannot share the more information because of security reasons. In the Beautiful Afghanistan, we have classes for students. We have teachers that they are inside Afghanistan, they helping students, very brave women. We helping families that they are in need and they don't have men to work for them because of restriction. Women cannot do work, and women, if not work, how do you continue their life? That's really hard for them. And also I share, we listen the story from the woman that they need to talk with them, because as I said, you woman in Afghanistan is alone, and they need someone to be with them and listen their story. So we listen from a woman inside Afghanistan. We help families in need, and also we have students that they are busy with their studies with different subjects. And we just when I and currently more than 100 students are busy with their studies, and we have 5 teachers. When I was adding the new students to the class, when they had requests for me, when I had one by one talking with them, some students said for me that we want to study, but we have problems. We cannot, we don't have access to internet. We need internet, so we want to join. I had a request from them, and also the teachers that you're with me. They said we have degree, we have education, we have experience, but no one value us in Afghanistan. And they said, if it's possible, please, if we help the students with their study, if there's way for us, if we receive some gift, some help, beside of the study, that the help that we do with students. So this was second request. One was from students, second was from teachers, that they ask for me if there's way to help them. So when I just thought with myself, I said, okay, I don't have more income like from my salary that I receive. That is not enough if I help with this all, and I don't have like more income, more like sources if help with them, or I don't have like any group to introduce them. So I just thought to create GoFund link. I created that, and I had this thought, and I said, okay, I believe that women around the world are all the time with us, and they help us a lot. I will share this, and women around the world will help us, and that will be great if students or teacher receive what they need. So when I share it, this is like, I would like to say again, thank you. I really appreciate it from my bottom of my heart. This is wonderful. When I share it with wonderful people and women see help with the students, and a wonderful woman share that. So I would like to say, Miss Maggie, when she helped $1,000 in the GoFund, which that was very great, which that was very big, and most of our students in last month had internet, and they were very happy. I would like to say thank you to her, and thank you to every one of you that you donate and help students. I really appreciate it. For your information, I would like to say I created the GoFund link to help the students, but I am not that one to share the help with students. My trustable friend did do the second part. So when I see that my trustable friend share the help, they just send me the picture. They send the picture of that all for me. When I see that all is fine, I just share that all pictures to GoFund. Why I created the GoFund link? There is a reason. First reason, you all can see that okay, how much people are donating. And then when I share the update, you all can see, okay, how much then a student spend it with their studies. Just I want to make sure like everything is great, and to make sure you all, every donation that you all do, as I explained, I don't do the second part, which that is to share that with students, with or family in need. But I'm here for every question you all have. I'm here to answer to every donation you all doing, because the main goal is to be together, to help each other, and finally to all together be strong, and to stand up with Afghan women. This is all help. So we all together work together to help students. That is why if you all have question, I am here to answer. I have very trustable friends that you are doing that.
Brilliant. Thank
and
you
also,
so. Oh, sorry, go on.
At the end, I want to tell you, situation in Afghanistan is very complicated, very dangerous, based on the all. So if someone talking talking on behalf of Afghan women, on behalf of WTI, please, I will share the WDI Twitter account, WDI Substack. Please follow that and read the reports from Afghanistan. I share that all in the question and answer section. Please let me know. I want to make sure that all is fine, all is safe for us, and Thank you so much for your listening, for your time. I really appreciate you are all a stand-up woman, life, freedom. Thank you.
Right, so we're going to play the report from Kerry and Megan in Australia, but Kerry in USA, and then we'll come to the end.
Hello, everyone. Over the weekend, WDI USA hosted a panel discussion on women's sex-based rights at the Seattle Public Library, and as described by post-millennials Katie Daviscourt, who provided on-the-ground reporting, despite the ruckus caused by over 100 armed and aggressive Trantifa militants intent on disruption, the event itself ran smoothly, thanks to the combined efforts of library security and the Seattle Police Department. Not only did the black-clad militants attempt to harass and intimidate women as they entered the library, but once the panel discussion commenced, they began scaling the library building, banging on the windows, and attempting to breach the doors, prompting the on-scene arrival of the SPD, who ordered the demonstrators to leave or risk arrest. After a brief standoff, the militants relocated their protest to the back entrance, only to return to the front as the event came to a close. But police and library security were able to safely usher participants out via another exit. As for the event itself, attendees told the Post-Millennial that the panelists' stories inspired them to take up the battle to protect women's spaces. Some reported they were moved to tears. I'm told that one of the more impactful presentations was provided by detransitioner Elle Palmer, who was speaking publicly about her experience for the first time. Anti-woman activists also attempted to disrupt the press briefing at the courthouse the next day, following oral arguments in the Olympus Spa case. Next, I'd like to share the latest developments in the ongoing Mountain West Conference women's volleyball boycott. Both Boise State and the University of Wyoming have now forfeited their second scheduled match against SJSU, the team that includes male player Blair Fleming, since I last reported on the issue. Additionally, Outkick recently reported that they could find no evidence that San Jose State is investigating the most serious allegation in the Title IX complaint filed by San Jose State Associate Head Volleyball Coach Melissa Beatty-Smooth, namely that Blair Fleming conspired with the Colorado State player to throw the match between the two teams, as well as to injure his teammate Brooks Slusser. But perhaps the most critical development is that last week, a dozen women filed suit against the Mountain West Conference and its commissioner, along with officials at San Jose State University, alleging violations of Title IX and of their First Amendment rights, all stemming from the presence of male player Blair Fleming on the San Jose State roster. The plaintiffs, which include San Jose State co-captain Brooks Slusser and two former Spartans, as well as athletes from 4 other Mountain West schools, alleged the conference adopted a new transgender participation policy in an attempt to chill and suppress the free speech rights of women athletes. The suit seeks emergency injunctive relief ahead of the Mountain West Conference volleyball tournament set to begin in Las Vegas on November 27th. The suit is being funded and backed by the Independent Council on Women's Sports, ICONS. Another sports-related development that doesn't seem to be getting the attention it deserves is a recent federal court decision in Sewell versus Connecticut Association of Schools to allow the case of 4 female athletes who are challenging a state athletic association policy that allows males to compete in women's high school sports to proceed, rejecting the request of state officials to dismiss the case. A statement attributed to ADF legal counsel states that Selena, Chelsea, Alana, and Ashley, like all female athletes, deserve access to fair competition. The Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference's policy degraded each of their accomplishments and scarred their athletic records, irreparably harming each female athlete's interests in accurate recognition of her athletic achievements.
following the Second Circuit's decision to allow these brave women to make their case under Title IX and set the record straight. The district court has rightly rejected the state's request to dismiss the case and instead recognized that the girls' schools are potentially liable for subjecting the plaintiffs to discrimination under their athletic programs in violation of Title IX. And that's all I have today. Thank you.
Greetings from Australia. The Federal Misinformation and Disinformation Bill has passed the lower house of Parliament and was introduced into the Senate just on the 18th of November. Notable issues with the bill include the inclusion of opinion in the definition of misinformation, so it's not just fact. Per the explanatory memoranda, the reference to information in the bill is intended to include opinions, claims, and commentary. The bill also includes vilification in the meaning of serious harm, which is the test for the disallowed information. And it includes grounds such as gender identity in that category. So commentary or opinion that vilifies on the basis of gender identity would be classed as misinformation under the bill. It also includes things like harm to public confidence in the banking system or financial markets. Currently, 39 senators have announced that they intend to vote no, which would cause the bill to fail in a Senate of 76 members. The vote is scheduled for next week. So, sisters, please contact your senators and urge, if you are in Australia, them, particularly all non-Labor senators, to attend on the day and oppose the bill. On a state level, Victoria's anti-vilification bill is likely to be introduced in a week or so to be confirmed. Since 2019, plans have been to expand the state's existing hate speech protections. Currently, only race and religion are protected. The idea was to add a number of new protected groups and to make prosecution easier. There was a bill proposed in 2019 that lapsed late in 2022. It did make it to a parliamentary committee, but the committee recommended the legislation go ahead. So that's basically the bill that is being put to the Parliament now, as far as we can tell. An overview of the proposed law was released, with public consultation closing in October this year. Analysis of the consultation has not actually finished. It was scheduled to finish in December, but the bill has apparently already been drafted and is set to be introduced into state parliament in the next fortnight. It seeks to abolish the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, establish civil offences within the Equal Opportunity Act for vilification on the grounds of race and religion, but also disability, gender identity, sex and sex characteristics, sexual orientation specifically, and personal association. And it seeks to insert offences for these into the Crimes Act. The proposed changes would also lower the bar for civil and criminal vilification offences and increase the maximum penalty. Groups such as LGB Alliance and the Feminist Legal Clinic, among numerous others, have made submissions and have published concerns over the silencing of feminist and gay advocacy voices. So we'll see how that goes. Moira Deeming, Victorian MP, put a question on 30-day notice to the Victorian Government regarding the Royal Children's Hospital Gender Clinic Trans 20 study. The clinic finished observing its cohort in 2020, but the clinic has refused to release any results or publish reports on it since. And so there are, of course, questions why these results have not been released, and are they being hidden because the results are not favourable. And finally, a report on the ABC on the 18th of November announced that a number of regional queer events, including Mardi Gras parades, face possible closure after major sponsors, including Coles supermarkets, have pulled their funding or refused to renew their funding for another year. Organisers said that it wasn't just about losing an event for the weekend, it was about saving lives. President of Dragged Out, Andrew Madden, said the queer community was at risk of losing visibility because the festival celebrated a different part of humanity we apparently don't often see. I believe that this week is Trans Awareness Week, or is that next week? I think it's next week as well, and the month after. So that's all from Australia. Thank you very much.